Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode we're going to talk about why Jon Moxley is the best wrestler in the world. Now you may come into this, you may have some preconceived notions. I may not be able to sway you, I may. Wrestling is an art form, so there is some subjectivity to it. I'm going to give you some cons, followed by some pros to why I think he is the best wrestler in the world. Jumping right off of that, we're going to go into the cons first, the arguments against him being the best in the world. He is kind of divisive. It's not as bad as, say, someone like the Young Bucks, where half the fans love him and half the fans don't. I would say it's more of a 80-20, 75-25 split, where 75% love him and there's another 25% that don't. One of my good friends, Gary, who's been watching wrestling as long as I have, and if you watch some of my early videos, he was my co-host on my early videos. He hates him. He hates Jon Moxley. He doesn't get it. There are others like famously Jim Cornette trashes him all the time on his podcast. He does not like Jon Moxley. He doesn't get it. There's a lot of people, and it kind of surprises me. It's kind of a similar way. I talk to a lot of people that don't like Zack Sabre Jr., and I don't understand it because both Moxley and Zack Sabre Jr. are two wrestlers that I thoroughly enjoy and I think are at the top of their game, and I think they're two of the best in the world. So I never understood why people can't like him. I can understand not liking a character. I was never a big Bret Hart fan, but you'll never hear me argue that during his run that Bret Hart wasn't one of the 4 or 5 best wrestlers in the world, because he absolutely was. I wasn't a huge fan of his. He wasn't to my liking, but I could definitely respect what he was doing. And that's I think there's not that for the people that don't like him. So that is the biggest con going against. The second biggest con going against him, I do think that when they're on TBS or TNT, he does need to tone down the blood a little bit. This is the most common complaint I hear about Jon Moxley, is that he bleeds in every match, that he wants to drink people's blood, that his promos are all about violence, which wrestling's a violent sport. I do think, and it's been said to death, if the wrong Warner executive watches this and sees a guy bleeding all over the place, he could call to pull them off of TV right then. And the case could be made. I mean, Jon Moxley bleeds in almost every match. I think for at least the TV market, I have no problem with him doing it on pay-per-view. I have no problem with him doing it when he goes to GCW. I have no problem with him doing it on TV if it was sparing. But he should tone down the amount that he bleeds on TV just a little bit. I mean, if you gave us a bloody match once every 2 months on TV, I'd be okay with that. But for the most part, your big angles should be leading to a payoff on pay-per-view, and that's when you should have the bloody match. That's where you should be bleeding all over the place. Just my opinion. That's my biggest con against him, along with the other con that I mentioned. Now we're going to go into the positive, the pros for him. First off, we got to remember, AEW, while being built on the Elite and Chris Jericho and the success of All In, their first big coup, their first big acquisition, other than those guys, the big surprise in their first pay-per-view, their first show, Double or Nothing 2019, was Jon Moxley coming out at the end of the main event, coming right over from WWE, being a main event guy in WWE, walking out there, attacking both Jericho and both Kenny Omega at the end of the show. So right off the bat, he was put in a role where you're seeing that this is one of our top guys. This is a main event player. He really should be considered that. And there was an excitement to that. There was a great sense. I was there live at Double or Nothing, and the crowd started chanting Moxley. No one chanted Ambrose. And yes, I understand that for the smart fans, that's who was going to that show, and it absolutely worked, because now for the people that may be casual that only know him as Dean Ambrose, now you're saying, well, all these guys know who Jon Moxley is. Why do they know this? So they'll go back and look at other Jon Moxley stuff. His stuff in CZW before the WWE was great. It was fantastic stuff. He was doing great work. That was an amazing way just to start as AEW. Now this, I guess you could say it's kind of a con, but it's not really to me. I think it was a pro. During the pandemic from February 29th in 2020 to December 2nd in 2020, Jon Moxley carried that AEW championship. And you got to remember, this is only about 5 months after the show had started on TNT and they were first on the air. So Jon Moxley was really the guy that that carried them in the early days, carried them through a tough time. AEW could have been seriously derailed by the pandemic. They were just barely getting started. They were barely on television when everything broke down. And you have a guy, he won before lockdown happened, but he carried the belt through a good chunk of the lockdown, and he kept fans interested in what he was doing, and he helped carry the company on his back during a time where you didn't know who was going to be able to come to work because someone could have caught COVID or someone could have been around someone. And it was a whole thing. He really put the company on his back, and he really carried them to a new height. To me, I think that's a positive. I think that run, coupled with the run he just had as the interim champion, and at the time of this, they haven't done the tournament after the championship was vacated. We're not going to talk about why. Everybody else has already covered that. But even his run as the interim championship, it shows that you could put this guy and plug him in, and he's going to be a dependable character that's going to carry your company when they need it the most. The two times that they've needed it the most during the pandemic, after CM Punk's first injury when they needed an interim championship, the ball's gone to Jon Moxley, and he's ran and scored a touchdown. That's why I think that's another one of the reasons why I think he's a punk. It's a pro. You can always go back to it. Next, I think the redemption story, which they haven't really played up a lot, and that may be his own choice, from a guy who the only time he's taken off was to go and deal with an alcohol addiction problem. There's an amazing redemption story in that. In this country in America, there are so many families and so much people that deal with alcoholism. My family has an extensive history on both my real dad's side and my stepfather's side. There's rampant alcoholism going through my family history, so I can relate to that. There's a lot of recovering alcoholics that are watching wrestling that can relate to that. There's a lot of people that come from families where they had a loved one that was an alcoholic or still is an alcoholic that can relate to that redemption story, and I think that that's something that they really need to do. They need to emphasize a little more to humanize him a little bit more. I do think it's a definite positive because here's a guy that overcame that, and he's thriving coming out of that. So I think that's another positive on his side. My next positive would be he is the workhorse of AEW. We talked about this, talking about his pandemic run, but he's the guy that you could count on. Him, and I'm going to say this, a lot of people are going to disagree because they haven't liked what he's done there. Him and Chris Jericho are arguably, other than CM Punk, the two biggest names that they have, and he's the guy, even more so than Jericho, that's gone out there week after week, month after month, and put on match after match after match, and he's been a fantastic in all of it. He is definitely one of their workhorses and one of the guys that really makes AEW what it is. He makes it special because his character, Jon Moxley the person, is special. And that's why that carries over on the television. That's why they use him so much. That's why he's in so many main events, because it resonates. It resonates with the fans. The fans give a crap. The fans care about him. Now, my next reasoning is his style. Jon Moxley has a style that's all his own. He takes a little bit from a lot of different people, but part of that is the style that he has matches up with so many other great wrestlers that there's a common denominator here. I'm going to read this list of wrestlers off, and this is just from 2022, of wrestlers that I think he's had great matches with. CM Punk, Chris Jericho, Mance Warner, El Desperado, Rouge, Konosuke Takeshita, and I probably pronounced that way wrong, Speedball Mike Bailey, Hiroshi Tanahashi, Will Ospreay, Bryan Danielson, I know I'm still getting used to it, and Homicide. And that's just a few. There's more. There's way more than that. That's just some to give you an example. Look at the difference in the wrestlers in there. You got guys that are like Rouge that comes from a lucha style. You got guys like Tanahashi who comes from a strong style. El Desperado who wrestles a junior style. Homicide, who's more of a brawler. Mance Warner, who's more of a brawler, a hardcore brawler. Speedball Mike Bailey, who wrestles in the X Division style. Will Ospreay, who's kind of a hybrid of strong style and the junior style in New Japan. Just a different people that he interacts with, that he continues to make great matches with from everywhere. You can literally plug the guy in with almost any wrestler in the world and he's going to have a fantastic match. To me, that's another reason why I think he's the best wrestler in the world. Now, other than that, one thing, and this is kind of a behind the scenes thing. The last thing I'm going to say why I think he's the best in the world. I've heard from the people involved, notably Claudio Castagnoli, Bryan Danielson, and William Regal, and even Moxley himself have said that the Blackpool Combat Club is a shoot. These are guys that practice together, that train together, that want to help the younger talent. They want to help the Daniel Garcias. They want to help the Wheeler Yutas. So that's a shoot. What you're seeing on TV about them wanting to reach out to the next generation and teach them, that's legit. He's doing the work. He's helping the Wheeler Yutas of the world. He's helping the Daniel Garcias of the world. Him and Regal and Danielson and now Claudio as well, they're reaching out and they're helping that younger generation to become that next generation of stars to get where they are. And to me, it's one of my favorite factions. I mean, everybody in it is very interesting. You got William Regal, one of the great wrestlers of all time, highly underrated. I keep saying it. Bryan Danielson, one of the best technical wrestlers there ever was. Claudio Castagnoli, criminally underrated. And Jon Moxley. And then, of course, Wheeler Yuta is a young guy in there now. As of the time of this recording, it may change soon. Just saying, there's current storylines that I think are going to change the dynamics and add someone to that. But I digress. Their whole style, their whole mantra is not only in front of the camera, it's behind the camera. And I think that's doing wonders for all of them. To me, I think it's just a fantastic thing. In conclusion, I do think that 2022 is definitely Jon Moxley's best year of his career. I would be shocked if when we get to the end of 2022 that anybody else takes any of the Wrestler of the Year awards. You can argue FTR. You can argue that. They've had a fantastic year as well. You could argue Speedball Mike Bailey. He's had a fantastic career. But I think if you really look at it, boil it all down, Jon Moxley is the best wrestler in the world right now. And the main thing to me, and I hear a lot of people compare Jon Moxley to either Stone Cold Steve Austin or Brian Pillman, and they say that he's a cosplayer or a tribute act to them. I don't think that that's the right comparison. I think the comparison to Jon Moxley is Terry Funk. I think Jon Moxley is the Terry Funk of this generation. He's a guy that could do anything with anyone, that can switch his style at the drop of a hat, that's believable, that's violent, that can wrestle. Terry Funk is known for a lot of things. He's known to be the hardcore legend. He's also known to be a tremendous technical wrestler, a great talker. To me, there's no one in wrestling that embodies that more than Jon Moxley. And that, to me, makes him the best wrestler in the world, because Terry Funk is probably, if he's not the best wrestler that's ever wrestled, he's number 2, and that's only behind Ric Flair. And I would say that both of them are 1A and 1B, in my opinion. So to me, Moxley is in that category. He's definitely the best wrestler in the world right now, but you may think otherwise. Let me know what you think. Smash that like button, share the video, comment, subscribe if you haven't. If you made it all the way to the end, give me a Mox in the comments, and let me know what you think. Do you think Jon Moxley's the best wrestler in the world? Do you think somebody else is the best wrestler in the world? Put that down there in the comments too. I want to hear what your opinions are. If you agree with me, if you think I'm totally insane, I like to hear from you. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this was my reasoning for why Jon Moxley is the best wrestler in the world.